So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle service, refined in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage, so then we can understand the time of the end as per Yirmiyahu the prophet. We find a layer of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. As we can understand then Yirmiyahu the 61st, we then established this time as the restoration period started in 2010 until prior of 2032. The calculation is extremely simple. So then let's evaluate what's going on in the world. As we read then Daniel the 11th chapter, we must recognize then Daniel the 10th chapter as solely regarding China. Daniel, he was obviously a tradesperson, very acquainted with the king's work, and he was responsible for bringing more trade or more deals or more contracts, so then the kingdom would be then further strong. So then what the nations are then after? They send their delegations, their representatives, in order to bring in more contracts, therefore making the economies stronger. Daniel did precisely the same. So Daniel was very acquainted with the time and the season of his own time prior of the spring feast, and he did understand how the future would play as then the generations were then spending themselves. Let's understand then 10th chapter of Daniel. Then Daniel the prophet, Daniel the tradesperson, Daniel the tradesman, Daniel the politician, he was involved then with the king bringing in more trade. Very obvious. So then, what was the deal then regarding China? Let's understand firstly then the 2nd chapter of Daniel, where then the Creator gave him the very understanding of the big statue, and then the base of the statue is then iron and clay. Understandably, after the 4th kingdom, then Rome, when it was then destroyed, then it was divided. Thus then started the iron and clay section of the statue. However, it was not enough for Daniel, because he was searching further what would have been taking place then later, in order for him to establish then the leader of the base of the statue. He did receive the understanding of the iron and clay not mixing, yet you find iron being strong and then mud being then weak. However, has to have some sort of directionship, so then you have trade during this time. You have to have a centralized trade for the others then to flow through. Then he set himself to pray. However, doing the usual of going out after his time with the king, and then after his services, going then to the river and then taking a nap wasn't enough. He felt that he should pray and fast, so he did. And then after more than 20 days, he then received an understanding of then the spirit of Persia that was then obviously blocking his understanding of the base of the statue. So he did understand that at the end of the time, after the 1,000 years of the Messiah, after the 1,000 years of Nahashatan, then the remnant, as we can understand from the instructions, would give us then not only tabernacling returning as per Yirmiyahu then chapter 1:8, but then the understanding of the trade being re-established as per Ezekiel 37th chapter, where the stick of authority is then granted for the sons of Ishmael, and then tabernacling for the sons of Yitzhak. Then with this in mind, we find ourselves studying then, because nations are trying to impose sanctions, in quote sanctions, because in fact there are many types of persecutions against China, and the latest you find again United States trying to take on the leadership of China. You find then the couple of B-52 bombers unarmed that did fly over the region restricted of China. Understandably, Japan is also involved with it, But the most important is for us to establish then a friendship regarding then the leadership of China. How do we understand this from the 10th chapter, as we were then speaking from the last understanding? Then we go to the next, the 11th chapter, where then the leadership of China then is given. So then there is no such a situation of countries coming together and trying to make a deal for themselves and make some sort of a balance or equilibrium amongst the nations, so then some of them they can use their own monetary system and then compete with China. This competition no longer exists. China was set from thousands of years ago for this time, the time of the restoration period, to lead the trade of the world. How do we find this answer? How do we find this statement? It's extremely simple. If you read the 11th chapter of Daniel, explains then from 11th chapter, then the 4th verse is where we are at. We are expecting next year then for China to close a deal with the Congo. So then the machine of Ezekiel, the 1st chapter, then is turned on. It's simply events, synchronized events of the instructions being placed in motion. It's very simple. So then the 11th chapter and the 5th verse then starts next year when Congo closes a deal with China and vice versa. So then, China at the moment, the objective of China is making deals with the nations. However, the style of trade of China must prevail. In whatever fashion or whatever understanding they can think of, then the leadership of China must remain. How do you read these in the Holy Instructions? You read by the extension. When you read then the kingdom of the East being divided, it's not truly being divided. The understanding in Hebrew is a division from a place that can't be divided. It's simply extension. You extend a system amongst the others without changing its main core. If you read the Holy Instructions, if you read Hebrew, you find there is no division. It is extension. So then, what can we understand from the latest reports regarding then the solar deal of China and the European Union? Let's start then with the European Union. As we understand, Daniel mentioned that the nation would try to come together and they try to adhere to each other, but they would not. So what went on? We find ourselves studying then obviously the 1,000 years of deceit. So when you read then the instructions regarding deceit, you don't find the beast. Revelation chapter 10 and then 3 chapters later, chapter 13, you find precisely then on chapter 13 then a precise understanding. There were a couple of beasts. Those are truly not beasts. The translator of the Revelation did not understand the facets. You find then obviously the beast, but you find the facet of deceit. So when you read then Revelation, the 13th chapter, you find the deceit, the first and second deceits of the same facet. Let's try to understand this further. The Messiah was granted then 1,000 years of his own kingdom. That's gone. It was from the time of the ascension of the Messiah then up to 1009 from the regular calendar, where then the Muslims destroyed then the tomb of the Messiah for the first time. Thus the cities were laid waste. Started then 1,000 years of deceit. So then the beast with the character or the facet of deceit then started. Was then subdivided in a couple of sections. The beast deceit and the beast deceit. You find 800 years was granted then to the Great Britain, and then a couple of 100 years then granted to America. That's how you read it. So then you find 1,000 years roughly regarding this beast facet of deceit. But the deceit is gone. We are during the time of precision. After 2010 and 2010 is time for precision. Devil no longer exists. Devil means slanderer or deceit. Deceit no longer exists. The 1,000 years of deceit is gone. We are during the time of the restoration period, and it's time of precision. Where do we find then this information regarding the European Union then and regarding their growth? The economical growth of the European Union or the Eurozone was only 0.1% of the last quarter. Nearly didn't grow. Now, they are not trying to make friends with China, they are trying to compete with China. They can't compete with China. China was led precisely this moment, lead the world in the trade. China must lead and the others must extend their way of trade. That's how we read then Daniel the 11th chapter. So then, the European Union has imposed a 42.1% on the solar products regarding then their deal with China. It's not going to work. United States already starting again flying over the South China Sea with bombers unarmed, but they did not inform them. They are trying to provoke. Then they're trying to make a deal with Japan. Japan is ruined. The economy of Japan is absolutely ruined. They have 10.8 roughly percent, rather than percent, but then trillions of USD in debt, and they only have then the GDP of 4.8. So they are double of debt and then only once as GDP. So twice as much as in debt than GDP. Obviously then we have to start asking ourselves what went on then in March of this year. United States went to China, they make a mockery out of it. Australia was involved with it. The Prime Minister of Australia was deposed because of it. There was Holder going then to New Zealand trying to establish a military base over there. Didn't work. You found then the President going to the Panama, people trying to come up with a deal. Didn't work. Then afterwards came then the scandal of the New Zealand's milk. Didn't work either, and they are yet fixing their economy because of it. And at this time, then the US is trying to push again against China. It's not going to work. It's not going to work because when we read the Holy Instructions, you find the 11th chapter, understandably then, the kingdom of the East being divided, but it's not division, it is extended. It is the extension of a system that extends itself further amongst the other nations. So it's not division of the objective of finishing. It is a division regarding extension. So then, as we have the proper understanding, what can we expect of China? Closing more deals, and most importantly with Egypt, Syria, and then the Middle East. It is extremely important tackling then the Middle East and making sure they are at peace. Because we are going to make a reference of what the Messiah has said in Matthew, the 24th chapter. The Messiah said very precisely to his people, and he said, you wilt hear of war. It is singular. And you will also hear rumors of wars. That's plural. Truly, when we understand the 11th chapter of Daniel, you understand there is only a place in the earth where war should be at, and it's Congo. When you read Yeshayahu the prophet, chapter 1:8, you find the prophet saying very plainly, woe to the land beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. That's where the war should be at. The rest of it should be only rumors of wars. They should be working towards a peace deal and refurbishment. These are the orders. So then, as the instructions are so simple, as we understand what Daniel then, knowing what he said regarding tabernacling, was very limited understanding of tabernacling at the moment because the nation was in exile. What then the nation exiled? The nation was in exile because the nation did not let the soil rest on a yearly Shabbat. That's why. It was 70 years of yearly Shabbat. So then their land had to rest. So they ended up going to exile. So then the order of the Creator was then completed. Then you find ourselves studying further and understanding then what is then the behavior of the other nations. They have to do exactly what Daniel has mentioned. As China extends itself, in modern understanding is not dividing but extending itself. Then the other nations simply adopt their way of trade. Does not mean that China is going to take over governments. That's not the point. But means then the way of production, the way of making trade having a leadership from China. Then the world then becomes harmonious. Then, what goes on with the rest of the world then? US is not working in their linker, computer, the computerized system. US is neglecting once again. There you find yourself every time US must come up with a computerized system, make sure then the Chinese system, when it is launched, the next 24, 26 months, then there is a linker, a computer linking up the system, linking up with the local banks and central banks, so they can get their taxes. As we understand, the Bitcoin system went up to 900 USDs. So it was valued at least tripled, indicating when the system comes, there won't be a link with the central banks. China is going to get the best of it. Then, for the other nations to get their taxes from this system, they must come up with a linker, with a computer system. And since the US yet holds the most popular market of money, of USD, it's absolutely proper, because we find then later a link with United States and Israel, becoming then the desolation, as we understand the desolation from Daniel. You find then the despised one being United States, then later making a deal again with Israel because of the lies that they will impose regarding then the returning of tabernacling. It's very, very explicit the way then the prophet explained. But at the moment, we are expecting this computerized linker to link up the central banks and local banks so people can do trade in the computer. Thus then, this is what Daniel was explaining, and knowledge would increase. Simply knowledge of trade. Let's then understand how the nations are going to be reacting because of this. Each nation must come up with a module of their own, as if each nation would have then a module system, a card where you can plug in your computer, and then when you do trade with a particular country involving Chinese system, then you have to pay your taxes. Thus then the linker establishes then the world's trade. Since USD is not going to hold for very long, United States must become an auxiliary force, because they have to build up themselves again. They have to rebuild. They are overspent. As any other nation, they must rebuild, so as USA, except China, except the Soviet Union, and except Africa, because they have their own agendas as per the instructions of the prophet. You find the Kingdom of the North, Soviet Union, Kingdom of the East, China, and Kingdom of the South, Africa. Those are the designers of the new system. As we understand, they're going to be in Brazil next year in March, the city of Fortaleza, state of Ceará. So then they will speak of what they expect from the new system where Brazil is part of. Then from then on, in September, the economy of USA is going to truly going down. Because as we understand, then Dragon Mart is going to be obviously opening next year in September, the first phase, where then products found in Cancun, Mexico, then people can get up to 5 times cheaper than buying in the US. So you can imagine the economy from then on. So then as we study these documents, let's make sure we understand we can't compete with China. China was not made for competition, it was made for extension. So then when we read then the Holy Instructions from its original manuscript, you understand. Extension of. So the nations can start get busy and rebuilding themselves, because there is much more coming, many more deals, and then the linker must be then becoming available for other nations so they can link up themselves with the Chinese system, local banks and central banks, and invest, so then the nations can do once again trade as per the time when Ishmael started. And later on we find more information in the 11th chapter of Daniel. So please stay tuned, much more coming up.